Hello, welcome to the Wildline podcast. I'm your host, Dan. This is a podcast about movies and how much money they make at the box office. We are going to do our normal weekend review for August 4th through the 6th. Kind of a strange weekend, right? Very atypical for a first August weekend. We're supposed to be sort of at the tail end of the summer season. But I think this year, we're going to call summer over. I think this weekend really proved it. I think I called it last weekend. But I just feel like this is it. Like, Dark Tower didn't open very well. The estimate was 19.5 yesterday. It actually came in at 19.1 with the actuals today. Underperformance, massive underperformance, and I'll get to that in a bit. But I think overall, the summer has just been very kind of... There's some big stories, right? Like, it's not that it hasn't been interesting. The box office is always interesting. It's just the numbers are really depressed. And, the big stories like Wonder Woman having the best legs of any comic book movie ever is an awesome story. And it's really interesting. But when you look at the rest of the movies coming out, there's not a lot of exciting things to talk about. The top three movies for the summer are going to be three comic book movies. And look, nothing against them, but like, there's really not that much interesting stuff to talk about, despite Wonder Woman's sort of cool run. Everything just seems kind of like normal. There weren't a ton of breakouts or unexpected things happening. Baby Driver, I think, would probably be the big one. Girls Trip as well. But everything else pretty much played to expectations for the most part. And the numbers are just way down. And when I was looking at Box Office Mojo and sort of using their ticket inflation model and looking back at the last few summers, and this looks like it's going to be the worst summer ever. It looks like, unless, and I think they measure through Labor Day. Unless Hitman's Bodyguard or Lucky Logan really pull off something crazy, I guess it's next week. It's going to be the slowest summer ever. And, obviously the reasons for that are varied, but it's so obvious what's happening. The business is changing, right? Like, I don't think it's an economic thing. I think the economy is doing quite well. We're on the longest recovery, I think, in memory, in terms of the economy just coming back from the crash in 2008. Things have been going pretty well for the last 10 years almost now. It's been a very long recovery. So I don't think it's economics that's causing people not going to the movies or cause them not to go to the movies. I think it's obviously the competition is so severe now. I think like Game of Thrones, which premiered, I guess, 3 weeks ago, and I guess it's the final season. That is so popular and the quality is so good that I don't even know what it costs to make per episode, but I think it's something crazy, like maybe $10 million per episode. It's nuts. The quality has gotten so good that it's better than a lot of films, and it's a huge sort of as a leg up where you don't have to go to a movie theater, right? Like, it's the golden age of TV, and that is really hurting the box office and the film business in general. I think that's one sort of major reason why we're seeing a depressed box office this summer. The other reason, I think, is obviously streaming, kind of related to the TV thing. If you can stay at home and watch a movie and be entertained for 1/10 the cost of taking your family or just yourself to the movies, you're probably going to do that. And you only go see a movie if it's something special, like, say, Wonder Woman, where it's a really cool, if you have like a daughter or something, you want to take her to see Wonder Woman. It has to be special, right? And there weren't a lot of movies this summer that felt very special. In the top three with the comic book movies, it's like, okay, yeah, they're cool. I didn't go see any of them because I'm not the biggest comic book movie person, but they also didn't seem like that amazing to me or that sort of special that I needed to pay like $15 to go see it. I did go see Detroit because I felt like it was special and I wanted to see it right away. That was a mistake, and we'll get to that later. So you got the golden age of TV. You've got extreme competition from home entertainment, mostly Netflix, Amazon streaming, right? And then I think you would do, and sort of relating to the specialness of film, you don't have a ton of amazing products at the marketplace is essentially another problem. Like, there certainly were some great movies released. A lot of them were very well received by critics and audiences, but they just did not, for whatever, connect enough with the masses. A movie like that, like I'm thinking, is like War for Planet of the Apes, which I don't even know what it is on Rotten Tomatoes, but I think it was in like that 90s or something. Or 93 on Rotten Tomatoes. Huge $150 million production budget. Should have been a massive movie. 86% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes. And it is just limping right now to $130 million in its fourth weekend. Extreme underperformance. Maybe a flop, but definitely a massive underperformance for that film and probably the end of that series. But I don't know, whatever it was, it didn't feel new or special. It felt like a retread of the last one, at least from the marketing perspective. And despite the fact that it was a high quality film, it just didn't connect with people. So you have a lack of like really interesting products and movies in the marketplace that are going to hook people in. You have streaming, you have Netflix, which is upending the business, and then you have TV as a competition, which is sort of related to the streaming thing, home entertainment. And the box office is in one of those just ruts right now. I think the fall is going to change a lot for it. I think we're going to see a bigger September this year than we ever have before with it. I feel like it's going to be massive. But I think the overall story is super quiet box office. And I hate to say it, but I think the business is a little bit in trouble. And this is like the perennial, Cassandra sort of fear that eventually first it was VHS, then it was DVD, then it was, then there was, obviously before that was cable, then Netflix. And the box office and the movie industry has always seemed to weather those storms pretty well. And there's always a Chicken Little saying the world's gonna end, right? The sky is falling. I do think what's happening now is a little bit different. I think a point especially to Netflix and Amazon, where they're basically becoming their own production companies. I think it's going to take a while for them to really ramp up to the level of a Warner Brothers or a Sony or a Universal, but I think they will get there. Despite the fact that Netflix is in $20 billion in debt, their product is so good, they crush $8 billion in revenue a year, right? And that's only going to grow. And, if they ever get into trouble, they'll just add $1 to your fee. You listen to people and how they talk about Netflix. It is the most amazing deal ever, right? When you think about it for what you get. Now, people will complain, they have less libraries and smaller libraries. Well, Netflix knew that was going to happen. They knew that they had such a good product and such a good idea at such a good price that the major studios would start pulling their content, which they've been doing for the last few years. But that's why Netflix transitioned over to producing content and creating their own content. And there will be, a tipping point. I think we're at the tipping point for the box office in general, right? And the movie business, I think, will come a little bit later when things really become upended. But I think for the box office, less and less people are going every year. And people will point to, well, look at all the money they're making, the tickets are going up and stuff like that. There is something to be said to the fact that the number of people going to the movies is just dwindling and it's getting smaller every year. And so I do think that they're in a rut, and I don't know if it's just a temporary thing where it was just a really shitty summer maybe this year, or it's going to be more long lasting. I think there's going to be a long lasting descent. I obviously don't see movies ever going away in the box office as it is now going away anytime soon. People always want to go to the theater. It's just a really exciting experience, especially for like a big movie like Dunkirk or Spider-Man. You probably want to see it in a theater just because it's a totally different experience than seeing it in your home. But for a lot of movies, there won't be a place for them anymore at the box office in the theater. And sort of we're in, I don't know if it's a canary in the coal mine this summer or it's just sort of an abnormally down summer, but something is off. Something's really off with what's happening. But enough about summer and how it kind of sucks this year. Let's talk about this weekend a bit and sort of let's dive into the details. The devil's in the details. So this last weekend was August 4th through the 6th. It was expected to be a lot bigger than it was. Dark Tower, I don't know. On paper, Dark Tower seemed like it was going to be a big film. Just a lot of my friends are Stephen King fans. The moment it was announced, they were super stoked about it. It seems like it obviously has this massive fan base to go see it opening weekend and build up the hype for it. That all was happening, and then the first trailer dropped, and people are kind of like, wait, what? Okay, it's like, you know, you got a great cast. You have a great source material, but there's something really off about the trailer. It seemed very dull. The colors just seemed muted. It kind of seemed mundane and maybe even a little middling. And Matthew McConaughey felt like he was hamming it up it almost seemed like one of those Lincoln car commercials that he's in that was parodied so well on SNL by Jim Carrey. It kind of seemed a little bit hammy. Like, it didn't really connect as a major, huge blockbuster movie that you're going to rush out and see, right? And so people got a little nervous about it when that first trailer dropped, and I don't even know what that was, probably like May or something like that. But I think people still thought, okay, fine, it's not, you know, maybe that was just bad marketing. We'll see when the second trailer drops. And that dropped, I don't even know, like maybe a month ago. But it was the same, and it felt very just tepid. So going into this weekend, expectations were pretty low. You know, I think when it was released and people saw it on paper, I thought probably $40-50 million opening weekend. I don't think that was very off in terms of my expectations compared to other people. I think that was pretty in line with what people were thinking. I was going to say at least $100 million it's going to make, probably like 120, maybe 150 if it's a really good movie. That all dissipated over the summer as more and more content of the movie came out. It became clear that something had gone wrong, right? Something was off. And I never read the books, but even my friends who love the Dark Tower series, they saw the trailers and the promotional stuff coming out, and they're like, this doesn't feel right. Like, something feels off about this. Well, lo and behold, you know, Hollywood Reporter put out an article last week basically detailing the absolute shit show that was the production of this movie. To me, the real canary in the coal mine that Dark Tower was going to suck was that it's based on these series of books that are super long. So you have tons of content to work with, right? And I don't even know how they did that. Like, did they, is this film supposed to be the entire book series? I don't know. I don't even want to get into that. But I knew something was off when the runtime was less than 90 minutes. I believe it's 88 minutes. That's effed up. For a movie that's supposed to be this massive fantasy sort of opus in a sense, right? That's what the books are, so you'd expect the film to be like that, and it just wasn't. Like an 88 minute film, like I would expect maybe a horror movie or a comedy. Sci-fi fantasy epic movie, I would expect it to at least be 2 hours. And what that tells me is that like something went really wrong with the production with it. And the Hollywood Reporter sort of details, if you just look at Hollywood Reporter, they have the article up. Basically, I don't know, it was they lay a lot of the blame on the director, and I think probably rightly so. But I think when you go through the article and read it, it becomes pretty apparent that they did not know how to transition or adapt the source material for a film, or they didn't really think about how they were going to do it long term. My guess is they thought that this film was going to launch a whole series of Dark Tower films and create a whole universe, which they easily could have done because the source material is there for that. But I think they screwed up the script essentially, and they were left scrambling, and the movie it sounds like it was in complete pieces until they found a way to edit together this 88 minute horror show of a film. The reviews dropped on Wednesday, and it was just real great. Schadenfreude to see this thing just crash and burn. Not that I'm against the movie, but I do kind of enjoy it when a major movie that, you know, they spent hundreds of millions of dollars to make and market is just a total shit show and just awful. I'm gonna try and find some pretty good reviews here that just rip into the film, and it's so obvious why people aren't connecting with the film, because at the end of the day, they didn't know what they were doing. They didn't know how to adapt it. So the narrative of the movie is a complete mess. You know, it's got a 35 score on Metacritic. 35. That's one of the lowest I've ever seen for a major motion blockbuster picture, supposed to be a blockbuster. Let's see if I can find a really good quote for you guys. Let's San Francisco Chronicle, Mick LaSalle. He's basically my favorite critic in the United States. He basically says, after building up to the great climactic confrontation for 2/3 of the movie, it's a total letdown. Or Rolling Stone, this unholy mess shouldn't happen to a king, much less a paying customer. Wonderful. Let's see. Too bad this tower of air will leave them muttering red rum on the way out. I mean, these are pretty vicious. The decade-long effort to bring Dark Tower books to the screen looks like a cheap, unauthorized cash-in. And that's the general gist. Like, you know, critics tend to give certain types of movies a pass, right? And I think the fact that this was an adaptation from Stephen King, and I imagine a lot of these critics probably like Stephen King, read his books, they were maybe a little bit less lenient, because if you were doing something from scratch and creating original content without a source material, such a strong, rich source material as this, they'd give it a little bit of a break. But they did not give this any break whatsoever, and they viewed it essentially as a cash-in. And the audiences, for the most part, you know, agreed with them. You know, right now it sits at it's 18% in Rotten Tomatoes. Obviously, the critics despise the film. 4.1 rating out of 10. Awful. Audiences didn't really like it that much either. 62% on Rotten Tomatoes audience score. And the numbers reflect that. Opened at $19.1 million this weekend. Per theater average was about $5,500 per theater. That is not what you want to see in an opening weekend for a movie this big. The production budget was $60 million. But I can guarantee you right now that the marketing budget for this was well north of $60 million just domestically. I would probably put it at like $70-80 million. Maybe I'm totally full of shit on that, but I've never seen a movie marketed this heavy that wasn't like a $50-60 million spend. Like, it was marketed like like an MCU film, just everywhere constantly. You know, they didn't give it a super wide release. It was only on about 3,500 screens. So I don't know if Sony was like pulling their punches or something, or maybe they knew it was gonna bomb. You must think that Sony knew about 6 to 8 months ago that this was not going to happen. Like, they knew that it was a trashy film and no one was going to like it, which is why I was surprised they spent so much on marketing. It was just, maybe they saved money doing more social media than traditional marketing, but there was no stone left unturned for the marketing campaign of this film, and so they went all in, and they're gonna lose. I don't know how the financials are gonna work out for this. It's at $19 million now for the weekend. You have to imagine it's pretty front loaded, because if it's Stephen King fanboys went to go see an opening weekend. So you're looking at it, they would be lucky to get to probably $60 million domestically. That's pretty terrible. The expectation, I think, like I was saying before, was probably $40 million. Hits 120, maybe 150 overall was probably the expectation for this. So this is definitely a massive underperformance. It could border on a flop depending on the legs. If it doesn't reach 60, then it's definitely a flop. That's sort of the Mendoza line, or the barrier that I'm arbitrarily laying down right now in the moment. But if it can't make back its own production budget, it's a flop. It might be able to get there, but with the quality being so poor, I think its legs are just going to collapse underneath it. So we'll see what happens with that. But that's another big blow for Sony, and I don't know where Sony's going to go, right? Like, Sony got lucky with, well, not lucky. I mean, they developed Spider-Man Homecoming, so they'll make a good, I don't know, 150 million bucks on that, probably more like 100. They're going to be just in trouble. They cannot get anything going since the hack. And they kind of seem like in a very competitive environment right now at the box office, with the whole business kind of hurting. And you saw like the cinema stocks, AMC, Regal, all those people, their stocks are going down because the business is just not there anymore. So it's super competitive, and the weak one in the herd is going to get picked off. And Sony and Paramount right now are two of the very weakest. I just get the feeling that either their parent company is going to sell them out, or they're just going to get shut down, right? Sony feels to me like the most vulnerable. They can't really get anything going, and they're spending a ton of money on these big franchises. And The Dark Tower is just not going to help. Its performance is just not great, and they'll be lucky to make their money back on it. But still number one, so it won the weekend on a very quiet end to the summer. Number two this weekend was Dunkirk, 17.1 million, 35% drop, which is great. It added 266 screens. I'm not sure why. Maybe IMAX or something. I'm not sure. And its third weekend, sits at 133 million bucks. Overall story in Dunkirk is that it's a success, right? It's a World War II movie, which is a genre that's been hurting for the last few years. It's kind of seems really stale. Ever since Inglourious Basterds, I feel like the genre hasn't really had a lot to offer, and maybe it won't for a long time. Like World War II movies were essentially westerns from the post-war period until now. But maybe this general audience are getting sick of talking about Nazis all the time. So Dunkirk, but I think about it this way, okay, Christopher Nolan takes kind of a risk, World War II film, Warner Brothers puts it out in July. It does kind of seem on paper pretty risky, and the trailers weren't to be, the teaser trailer was amazing with the plane diving on the soldiers on that boat with that sort of like high-pitched screaming sound as the plane was diving into them. That was cool. But the full trailer kind of seemed a little boring. But it managed to sort of break through and offer maybe counter programming. It seemed like skewed a lot, definitely the over 25 age bracket for this film. Where's it going to end up? It opened at 50. You're going to expect it to do, because of the high quality, because everybody loved it. You're talking 93% Rotten Tomatoes, and an audience score of 82%, which is a little bit lower than I thought it would be. People are a little bit mixed about it because of the use of time in the movie. And why wouldn't you, of all the directors where people would get upset that they kind of use time in a weird way, Christopher Nolan, he fucking made alternative time structures a thing in major films. Like that was his thing with Memento. It was such a monumental moment, I think, in American film. That you'd expect that Christopher Nolan's going to do a little bit something different. Come on, Interstellar 2, Inception. The dude's kind of a weirdo. He likes weird stuff, and I don't really get people going to that movie. Maybe people didn't know that Christopher Nolan directed it. I don't know. If I go into a Christopher Nolan movie, my expectation is that my mind's going to be blown on some level, right? It's going to be a little abnormal, but in a cool way. It opened at 50. I think it's going to at least do 3x. So you're talking 150 domestically. I have no idea what's going to do worldwide. Obviously, the UK loves it. But I think it's definitely a success. Now, it didn't super break out, which I thought it might. But I thought it was going to go higher than 50. I thought it was going to go 60 or even $70 million opening weekend. There wasn't a lot going on that weekend. It's been a quiet summer. Looking for a real big breakout. But looking back on it, like, its performance actually seems really good. Like, opening at 50 for this type of movie at this time of the year, and then ending probably pretty far north of 150, you really can't complain about that, right? But that was number 2 this weekend. Number 3 was the Emoji Movie, which I just don't want to fucking talk about at all. I hate this movie. I haven't seen it. Nobody wants to see it. Who wants to see the Emoji Movie? Critics hated it. 6% in Rotten Tomatoes. Audiences savaged it. 43% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes. But yeah, it still somehow makes money. It's at almost $50 million. It made $12 million this weekend. 51% drop, which is high for a children's film. That is actually really high for a children's film on its second weekend. That's kind of, you're expecting like low 40s for a kid's film. Per theater average is below 3,000 right now. This one's going to disappear quickly. I expect 50% or more drops until it's run out of the theater, which I hope is sooner rather than later. And who made the Emoji Movie, folks? Sony. I'm just telling you, man. Sony's in real trouble. They are on the ropes. And someone posted an article and was like arguing that Sony's doing okay because their film division only lost $86 million last quarter or something like that. And I was like, look, they're gonna move money around all day long so they don't look like they're in a tailspin. But I can tell you right now, they're not doing well. Enough of me shitting all over Sony. Number 4 this weekend was Girls Trip. I think this is a big story that is fascinating. Girls Trip from Universal only dropped 42%, made $11.4 million on the weekend. Lost about 66 theaters, but it's still on 2,500 nationwide. Actually, not even nationwide, US and Canada, to be precise. Per theater average was about $4,400 per theater. Total gross so far is a very surprising $85 million. Production budget was only $19 million. This is a breakout hit, right? I think going into a couple weeks before Girls Trip coming out, people are expecting, maybe it'll do like high teens. Maybe if it's good, it'll triple that and maybe probably hit $60 million total. And that would be a good performance for that film. But it definitely has broken out. There's something special about it. I think it's fascinating for a few reasons. One is that it's a rated R comedy, and it's one of the few rated R comedies to do this well in the last few years. It is kind of I wouldn't say dying genre. It's just a genre that is going through a real lull right now. We had the heyday of the rated R comedy about 10 years ago, when Superbad and Knocked Up came out in the same summer of 2007. And then it hit another peak in 2009 with The Hangover, and then Hangover 2 a couple years later. And then we had Bridesmaids, not to go through the entire history of rated R comedies, but those are sort of the high points. And then, the last few years, it's been very, very, not even quiet, a lot of flops. A lot of rated R flops have been happening. And there, I guess the genre needed a winner. And, the other interesting fact about it is that, the story is for African American, or a group of African American, maybe 4 or 5. So that's a little bit different. You don't always see that at the multiplex, a film headed by a group of African American women, especially in a rated R comedy like this. Kind of a unique product at the end of the day. But it's connecting with people really well. And I think that cinema score is an A+. Which is insane. You never see an A+. Critics really liked it too. So I think it's a big win for Universal, and it might get a streak started with rated R comedies coming back. It could happen. I don't know. This one, maybe it's just a one-off. Because it's been just a dismal year for those films. And maybe, I don't know, I kind of get the feeling this feels kind of like a one-off because it's a pretty unique movie. I don't know if it's going to start a pattern of bringing back one of my favorite genres of film, which is the rated R comedy, but we shall see. So expect that one to keep burning a long wick here as August really gets into a quiet period next weekend, or this weekend, and then next weekend as well. Everything's pretty quiet until it comes out in the beginning of September, so it can make a lot of money in the month of August. So Girls Trip was number 4 this weekend, 11.4 million. Number 5 was a very strange film, Kidnap. Kidnapped. I want to say Kidnap, but it's actually Kidnap, which is very strange. Technically an indie film. Averon was the production studio, the distributor. I don't even know. I've never heard of them before. I think it's the only movie they've put out. It's Halle Berry. I believe it sat on the shelf for 2 years. When the trailer dropped for this about 6 months ago, I looked at it and I was like, this looks like a straight to DVD movie from the mid-90s. That is, the production quality of it seemed quite poor. It looked like a total mess. Somehow they got into theaters, and somehow it made $10 million this weekend, with a pretty decent $4,200 per theater average, right? That's not bad at all. And it's surprising for a lot of reasons. It's surprising that it actually it's surprising that it got made to me, right? Like, Halle Berry seems like, despite the fact that her career's kind of been rough lately, I feel like she would know not to be in a movie like this. It just seemed so poorly done. And that's when I saw the trailer, I was like, oh, this is probably like a straight to VOD movie. But no, they got it into theaters. It's surprising for that. It's surprising that it has kind of done okay. Like, it's gonna, I would suspect, to do $25-30 million total, which is not a bad take for a movie like this. And it's weird because it's an independent action thriller, which is very rare that those get made, and rare that they get into a theater. Like, a lot of those end up on VOD, straight to VOD, and that sort of makes sense. They make them for like $5 million, and then they probably make it up on the VOD sales, and maybe streaming, like a streaming deal. They usually don't go to the theatrical route because nobody will distribute it, and maybe it's a bad business decision because it would cost too much to market it, and they're not going to make any of that money back. So the fact that this one got into the theaters is just so strange to me. But the fact that it's doing well says something. It says that, like, if you're thinking about the overall box office and how the business is done, you basically have 3 types of movies that exist, or 3 types of movie productions. You have the major studio productions, and this is everything from a smaller romantic comedy all the way up through a huge blockbuster like Avengers. A major motion studio goes through the same process for all this, right? Like, you find your script, you find your director, you give it all the money for the production, and then you do a full-on marketing campaign. There is a very specific process to that whole thing. And now, it might be super inefficient, and it probably is on some level, because the studios haven't really had to compete with somebody like Netflix recently. But they had their way of doing things, and it tended to work decently well most of the time, or maybe half the time, maybe a quarter of the time. But it was very clear that if they're gonna put the money into this production, they're gonna put it out in the theater. Like, that's usually never a question mark, right? And then you have the other thing. So that's like, they're thinking about the final product. Everything's going towards the final product. They know it's going to be in the theaters, and that's what it's going to be. And they're expecting it to make $40 million opening weekend, and that's how they make the film, with that expectation, right? Then you have like the indie side of things, where you basically have art indie and non-art indie, right? Art indie is something we're all very familiar with. It's been around forever, but it's been pretty popular since the early to mid 90s, like Sex, Lies, and Videotapes, Steven Soderbergh, the whole Sundance movement. So we're all very familiar with that. It's essentially a group of artists come together and say, hey, we should make a movie, or one person says, hey, I want to make a movie, and they basically scrape together money from whoever, usually not a big studio, usually like an angel investor or friends and family, or very, very small production companies. And the budgets are not very big. They can be, $100,000 all the way up to a few million, or even higher than that. But they're not in the $20-30 million range. They're just not. Like, that's where the big studios take over. And they essentially make this film all on their own without any big studio help, and then they go shop it around, right? They go to Sundance, they go to Telluride, they show it in every film festival they can, hoping that a big company will buy it and help them distribute it. A good example of that, of a movie that's still out in theaters right now, is The Big Sick, right? It was made for probably, I can't even guess, but I want to say probably $7 to $8 million was the production budget. They made it, and then they went to Sundance, and everybody really loved it. And Amazon bought it for $12 million and did a distribution deal with Lionsgate to put it out. So that's, you know, the art indie films are very specific, right? It's usually the vision of a small group of artists who come together to make the film. And if it, you know, some of them do it with the intention of trying to really get it bought and make it famous. Maybe that's most of them, but there's also this sort of element of just making something really amazing. And I can think of like kind of just a good example of a movie like that, where something like Pi, you know, that Darren Aronofsky was his first film. There's no way he made that film thinking that it would ever be a massive film. It ended up doing pretty well on the independent sort of circuit, and I think it got a full release. I saw it in the theaters. But it was never the intention of him to make $100 million in that movie or become rich. He wanted to make great art. And I think a lot of the indie people on the indie art sort of path, that's what they're doing. They're trying to make the best possible movie they can, and hope that people connect with it, right? They're not necessarily trying to make a product to appeal to people. They're trying to make something really interesting and great. And maybe that's a naive way of looking at it, but I think that's very true. So you have that, this big studios, you have the art indie path, then you have the non-art indie path, which is the strangest path of movies that used to be a lot more popular. I want to say not even really in the 90s, but more in the 80s and 70s, where a group of people come together. It's not about making great art. It's about making an appealing movie and selling a product. They just can't get a major studio to back them. So they find independent people or just wealth somehow and money and capital. They raise it. They make a film for $10 million, $12 million. It's usually a little higher than the art movies. And they hope to God they can find a distributor for it. Right. And, it used to be a lot more popular, but it completely disappeared, I feel like, in the last 10, 15 years. So to see, like, Kidnap is one of those movies. It's an independent film. It's an independent production, but it's not an art film, right? It's not about trying to make a great quality film. It's about making a really interesting, good, entertaining product, which is why I had the VOD feel to it, because it seems like a major motion studio, kind of like Thriller, but it's missing all of the major studio polish, which is always like, it's a weird no man's land, I think, for a lot of those movies. But the fact that Kidnap got into the theater, and also 47 Meters Down, which was going to go straight to video, but they pulled that at the last second, and that went on to make over $40 million at the box office. It suggests that maybe there's a weird sort of non-art independent film movement happening, where people are able to scrape enough money together. Maybe the production costs are coming down because the equipment's a little bit less expensive than it used to be, and people can make interesting thrillers and action movies on the cheap, and then find a way to get them in the theaters and make some money off of it without using the big studio system, because it does feel outside the big studio system almost completely. But we'll see. We'll see if Kidnap and 47 Meters Down are harbinger for something new at the multiplex. I get the feeling that it might be, but there needs to be. If there's a third, then I'll solidify it as the truth. But right now there's only two, so we'll see what happens with those sort of non-arty independent movies. You would think that would go away because VOD and streaming just seem like they're really good options for that. You could sell the movie on VOD for $6. It might be more attractive to people than spending $15 in the theater for it, if it doesn't seem like a top tier studio product or major motion studio product. But I don't know. It seemed to work here, and I think maybe the movies themselves just seemed interesting enough to get people in the seats, and that's what matters the most. In any event, Kidnap was number 5 this weekend. Number 6 was Spider-Man: Homecoming with 8.8 million. A decent 33% drop. That's not even decent. That's a great 33% drop. Per theater average is about $2,800. Total take so far is $294. I said that this was not going to make it to 300. I'm totally wrong. And I'm wrong because when I saw the second weekend drop, first of all, the opening weekend was lower than it should have been. It should have been much higher than 117. I don't care what anybody says about reboots and this and that, blah, blah, blah. It's a major MCU movie. It needs to be well over, at least 130, 140 for this. So I thought it was pretty underwhelming, to be honest with you. Opening weekend was 117, not great. Then it dropped 62% on a second weekend, and that's where it was like, oh shit, like this could like actually underperform. But then it dropped 50%, and then the drops got smaller. Last weekend it was 40%. This weekend it was 33%, and that's with losing. It's down to only about 3,100 theaters right now. So its descent has sort of leveled off a bit, if that makes sense. It's still descending, obviously. It's losing. It's doing less and less each weekend, like every movie does. But that descent is getting a little bit slower. The velocity has changed a little bit. And so it's going to glide more at the end here and, do well over $300 million, which is better than we thought it was going to go to. And then, the multiplier at that point, it's blown past the Civil War multiplier of 2.3, which was so bad. God, I can't believe it had a 2.3x multiplier. It's such a terror. Not even, it was 2.28x. Avengers, I think, had a 2.4 multiplier. So it has a better take. It doesn't have a Wonder Woman multiplier, obviously. But it's a little bit better than I thought it was going to do, and a lot of people thought it was going to do in terms of that. If it hits 315, 316, then it'll have a 2.7 multiplier. I think that's a pretty big win for a movie like this. Now 315 for Spider-Man: Homecoming, you're thinking, like you would expect it to be 350. I don't really know where it's going to end up at the end of the day. It's done very well overseas. About $367 million overseas. It sits at 670 right now worldwide, and I'm expecting that it's been released everywhere. Maybe it hasn't been released in China because I don't see a Chinese number. I'm probably wrong about that, but $376 million internationally, 294 here. So it'll roll past $700 million. Like I said earlier in the show, probably a pretty big profit here of about $100 million, I would say. Just off the top of my head, at least $100 million. Now, does it do 150, 200? That seems a little bit more iffy, but it's definitely going to be a big profitable thing for Sony, and they certainly need it. I'll tell you that much. I don't know how far that $100 million profit's going to go with all those losses they've had. But I think the big story there is that its legs have kicked in here on the final couple laps that it's going to have. Number 7 was Atomic Blonde, 8.1 million. 55% drop, which is terrible on a second weekend. You don't want to see that for a movie like this. It's one of those movies that needs to kind of bubble underneath the surface and have low drops in order to do really well, just because there wasn't a ton of hype for the opening weekend. There was hype when the trailer dropped, and then it just dissipated after the trailer. And then by the time it opened, it was like, what? Atomic Blonde? What's that? Oh, yeah, that weird spy movie with the John Wick director with Charlize Theron. So that's not a drop that you want to see for a movie like this. You want to be in the mid 40s and just keep that pace going as it descends and closes out. Total take so far is only 34. The budget was only $30 million. It's focus features, and this sort of relates back to my discussion about Kidnap and 47 Meters Down and like a new sort of style of indie film coming into the theaters. Focus feature used to be like the art house imprint for Universal in the mid 2000s. Like it had like 21 grams. I think like Lost in Translation was focus features. All of the best. They had such a high quality because I remember this like in the mid 2000s. If Focus Features was making it, I was gonna see it, and it really was. I went to go see all of their movies. And something happened in like the last 5-6 years where they sort of started to take on more like action movies that were smaller. Like, these movies probably would have been mid-tier 10, 15 years ago. What I mean by mid-tier is probably like over $50 million budget, but probably under 100. Those movies kind of don't really exist a lot anymore. And so they've transitioned more of those smaller films to focus. And I guess they're kind of doing like horror films and action movies now. But maybe there is this sort of smaller, maybe indie movement in the action thriller horror. I mean, horror's always had that element. Like Blumhouse has just crushed it completely over the last decade. Maybe not even a decade. But with the action and thriller stuff, you know, that wasn't a really ripe sort of place for smaller production budgets. But now maybe it's changing. But Atomic Blonde is not giving the right signal on that one. Sort of not doing very well. I don't know where it's going to go. It's probably going to make, at the end of the day, I don't even know. I mean, people seem to like the movie. Opened at 18. Let's give the benefit of the doubt and give it a 3x. You're looking at like $54 million. Okay, so that's not atrocious. It'll probably end up lower than that with a 50% drop. Let's say it like legs it to 50 million. That's not terrible. That's not awful. I don't think they marketed that one very well, or they just didn't blanket market it as much. Maybe they tried to save a lot of money on the marketing. I know it's a really fascinating story about how the movie industry works. Is read the article in the New York Times about Steven Soderbergh and Lucky Logan and how he is trying to upend how films are made and distributed. You will learn a lot in that short article about how things actually work. But one of the things that he's doing to keep production costs very low is he's basically holding off on most marketing until 3 weeks before, which is essentially right now. And now he's going to push a ton of marketing. We'll see if that works. Who knows? But Atomic Blonde just sort of not really performing the way you want to. But I don't know. Maybe it breaks even and make some money at the end of the day, but it's not a breakout at all. Number 8 this weekend was Detroit, the Annapurna, the first movie from the Megan Ellison production firm Annapurna. There's a great article in the Hollywood Reporter about her and this movie and what it means. I won't go into the details about it, but you know, she's Larry Ellison's daughter. He's obviously a billionaire. She has a lot of that money that she can use. She's produced a really awesome and helped to create a lot of really awesome films in the last few years. So there's very high expectations for her. She seems to know a good movie when she sees it, and more on these sort of art house type films. There's also a lot of negative press about her in this article about it. She's getting super flaky and whatever. It's Hollywood, like everybody's fucking flaky. But this is a big deal for her because this is the first movie from her production firm, Annapurna, and it has I don't want to say flopped. It has not done well on wide release. I noticed last week when it opened on 20 theaters that it did not have a per theater average that boded well for a wide release, and they put it on 3,000 theaters this weekend. I actually went to go see it, and it kind of crashed. 3.1 million per theater average was awful. $2,370 on your opening weekend. That's really bad, and that's how I sort of saw that happening last week. When I think it's per theater average, I want to say it was like 18,000. I can't remember. This one will disappear very quickly, especially because she probably doesn't have the buying power or distribution power to force theaters to keep it in there, and they don't even want it in there. You know, like it's a quiet August, but you know that's not going to make $2,300 per theater is not enough. So I imagine it's got one more week in the multiplex, and then they're going to start kicking it out really quickly. I don't know. Why is Detroit not doing well is a big question that I've had. Even after seeing it, I was like, It is an interesting film. I think I invested in it on the Hollywood Stock Exchange just based on the premise, the stars, and the director. It's Catherine Bigelow, right? Like Hurt Locker. She's an Oscar winner, right? And on paper, it looked great. The first trailer dropped, and it seemed kind of like it was almost an indie film that was pretending to be a bigger sort of major studio release. So what I mean by that is the production qualities looked really indie, but it was shot for $34 million. And maybe they're probably going for a documentary style sort of look with the film. But I don't know. It seemed like one foot was in the art house world and one foot was in the sort of mid-tier studio adult movie world, and it didn't really know what it was. And having seen it, it literally felt like it was a Hollywood film trying to be an art film, right? Or an art film trying to be a Hollywood film. It was trying to go back and forth, and it just did not work at all. And particularly the middle of the film kind of almost becomes like this weird sadistic torture porn. And the fact that it's like white police officers beating these young black people, it very, very uncomfortable to see it. And just not the type of movie that people want to go out and see in the summer. I was super stoked for it because I thought it looked interesting, and it's a time period and an event that I think a lot of people don't know that much about, the Detroit riots. But it honestly, it just was not a good film, and I think it was very poorly constructed. Me and the person I went, we actually walked out at the end. We walked out like with like maybe 5-10 minutes left, and so maybe that makes me an asshole. I've never walked out of a film before in my life, but it was like, it's just like the movie goes, I can't even get into the details, but it just, I could tell that it was ending, and I was like, dude, I want to go. And he's like, yeah, I don't want to stay for this either. So whatever, I mean, it is what it is. You know, I had high hopes for it, but not a good performance from Megan Ellison and Annapurna. And Detroit, I don't really see it doing a lot of award stuff either. I will say this, the acting was phenomenal across the board. Some of the best acting I've seen this year. I just wish they had a better script and a better editor to patch it all together in the right way. Okay, number 9 was War for Planet of the Apes. 41% drop at 6.1 million. Starting to lose a lot of theaters. Per theater average is $2,300. This is, you know, it's not a winner. You know, it's not a flop, but it's definitely an underperformance, and I don't think Fox is going to make another one of these films anytime soon. 10 was Despicable Me. Great 28% drop. 5.4 million. Lost about 580 theaters this weekend. Per theater average was 2,221 to be exact. Total take so far in Despicable Me 3 is 240 million. Now you look at that and you're like, oh, that's amazing, that's great. But compared to the other films, it's definitely underperformance compared to the rest of the series. Is Universal upset? Probably not that much. They're still going to make quite a lot of profit. It only costs $80 million to make. But it definitely is an underperformance compared to the other Minions and Despicable Me movies. That's the top 10. Some sort of little highlights outside the top 10. Baby Driver, nice 35% drop. It sits at $97 million right now, so it will hit $100 million. That was the big question for me when it opened so well. Huge win. I think of that, you know, I look at the big stories of the summer. I think Baby Driver, Girls Trip, and Wonder Woman, to me, are 3 things that stick out right away. Baby Driver is the first box office success for Edgar Wright. That means he's going to get bigger movies now, which everybody wins because of that, because he's a great director. Also just really good original content. If I'm looking at the top 10 now, like what is original content? You know, Dark Tower, no, that's a proven IP. Dunkirk, yes. Emoji Movie, I'm not gonna count. Girls Trip, yeah. I mean, I guess it's OC. Kidnap, I'm not gonna talk about. Spider-Man, no. Atomic Blonde, I think may have been a graphic novel. There's just not a ton, and then that sort of original content has really struggled. Big studios are going to invest in a known property like the Dark Tower that backfired on them. But that's what they do. From a financial and business sense, it makes sense because you want to spend money more on what you think is a sure thing. And if you think if a graphic novel or a book has that built-in audience that's going to go to the box office and see it, then you're probably going to invest money on that versus something that's unknown. Like Baby Driver. And Baby Driver has only had a $34 million budget, so it wasn't a big spend. But I think it's a bigger win than the money it's made, right? A big win for Edgar Wright because he's going to get bigger movies. But more importantly, it kind of proved that you can still write a really unique movie as long as it's high quality. People are going to go see it. That's not always the case. But Baby Driver sort of proves that original content can put people in the seat still. It doesn't all have to be, the 12th million Spider-Man movie. Valerian, the epic flop of the summer, which everybody saw coming a year before it was released, sits at $36 million so far in its third weekend. 62% drop on its third weekend. Terrible. SDX is going to go freaking bankrupt because of that movie. Probably not, but maybe. You never know. The Chinese investors for SDX are probably getting pretty nervous. I read some article that Chinese investors are actually starting to get very angry at the low quality of some of the movies that are coming out that they've invested in. So maybe, I don't know, maybe STX is going to be in trouble. Wonder Woman obviously is still crushing it. 31% drop. Again, it doesn't make any sense to me. In its 10th weekend, it is sitting at, like I said before, it's going to cross 400 million tomorrow. But its 10th weekend, I meant to say it was $1,700 per theater. It's just like, it reminds me of a big movie, a blockbuster that would come out in the 80s. Those things just like ran for like 4 or 5 months, no problem. Always like pulling a lot of cash, and it sort of has that feel to it. Big Sick, despite the fact that it did collapse on Wide Open like I predicted it would, it's having pretty good drops here, making about $2.1 million this weekend. Sits at $33 million. Should, I think, cross the $40 million mark, I think. If I'm doing my mental math right, maybe. Kind of a mixed message on that one. You can't really scoff at $40 million, but they paid $12 million for it. Marketing was at least 25, 30, so I don't know. They'll probably break even once it's... I don't know if they're going to break even, though, because they didn't sell the streaming rights. They own the streaming rights. Amazon Studios bought it. They'll probably sell the streaming rights to themselves. Some ridiculous BS. Hollywood math. Or Hollywood accounting, I should say. That's mostly the big stories for this weekend. The summer is really over, folks. It's sad to say. The summer is over. Oh, the only one thing I want to mention about this weekend... was Wind River came out, which is the guy who wrote Sicario and Hell or High Water, 2 very good movies from the last couple of years. This one looked, I don't know why they're releasing it now. What a terrible time to release this film. Taylor Sheridan. He also directed it. Right, so he wrote the script and directed it. Jeremy Renner, Elizabeth Olsen, John Bernthal. What a cast! Shane, who doesn't love Shane? John Bernthal. When he, I first noticed him as Shane, right? And I always see him as Shane now. But when he was acting in the first couple seasons of Walking Dead, I just thought that's who he was. He inhabited that sort of meathead, aggro alpha dude so well. That I was like, oh, that's just like and I thought the acting was bad because of that. But no, dude, this guy is like a chameleon. He is one of my favorite actors. There's something about him. He was great in Show Me Hero too, like a really small part, but anything that he's in, he just owns it. He owns it. I don't know how he does it. He's such a good actor. Jeremy Renner, whatever. Elizabeth Olsen is quickly becoming a force of her own. I first noticed her in, what the hell was it? Godzilla. And she, like, whatever, she had a really small part. But I don't know. I think she's going to go on to have a pretty successful career as an actress. Not just as, like, a famous actress, but, like, maybe even a more arty actress. We'll see. This is certainly the first step in doing so. Wind River, for all intents and purposes, looks like a fucking awesome movie. The fact that they released it this weekend makes 0 sense. They put it on 4 theaters. I'm guessing New York and Los Angeles. Did $40,000 per theater. It's just, come on. If you put this out in the fall or winter, it would have done 60, 70. I don't know. Maybe when over 100. Like if this came out during Oscar season, yeah, I could see it doing over $100,000 per theater and then break out and make some Hell or High Water sort of money and maybe get a lot of nominations. Now it's just lost. I think someone said Weinstein, who's released this film, is out of money or something. So that makes sense. Maybe they just pushed it out and didn't even market it, because I've seen zero marketing for this film, like none. And for a movie with this stature, with those stars in it, yeah, sure, it's an art house film, but come on, give me something. Give me some social media ads or something. It's coming to Nashville in a couple of weeks, so they are expanding it, but I'm not sure how much, and I don't know how much it's going to make. If you're only making $40,000 per theater on 4 theaters, like, you're not going to do that well when you expand. But maybe this story is a little more middle of America. We'll see. This is the only other thing I really wanted to call out from this weekend. Oh, Columbus also came out. Columbus is like one of those movies I have to see. It opened on 2 theaters. I'm guessing Los Angeles. $13,000 per theater. Nobody is going to see this. Absolutely nobody. That sucks, because I've heard a lot of buzz about this movie and how beautiful it's shot. For it to only do $13,000 in, I'm guessing, New York or Los Angeles, that's not good at all. Too bad. Oh well, people don't know good art when they see it. So that's sort of the end of the summer. This weekend we got Annabelle Creation coming out, which actually looks kind of good. When they announced it, I thought, ugh, done another crappy one. I actually liked Annabelle. I don't know what I thought the first hour of Annabelle was awesome. The last hour was pretty meh. But that first hour was really well done, and how they sort of worked in a sort of Manson-esque like killer group. What? Manson, Charles Manson, and his group of women, I guess, that would go kill people. I don't even know what I'm talking about. Obviously, I'm tired and fading right now. But I thought Annabelle, the first one, was well done. Kind of fell apart at the end, but that's okay. On paper, Annabelle Creation looked really boring. I just watched the trailer earlier today, and I was like, huh, this kind of seems pretty interesting. So we'll see how that does. You can't argue with a Blumhouse horror film, right? I mean, come on. Glass Castle's coming out this weekend on 1,400 theaters. I can't think of a worse release strategy for this film. 1,400 theaters in the middle of August for an art film that, yeah, sure, it's got Brie Larson and Woody Harrelson. You're going for the Oscars. What are you doing? Like, it doesn't make any sense. Maybe you know what? Maybe they want to get it out of the way and just release it and then push it onto streaming and have people see it that way and get buzz going for the Oscars. It's an Oscar-only film. It's Oscar bait. Like, that's why this film was made. Although it was one of the most famous books of all time. Not all time, like the last 10 years or whatever. I mean, everybody read Glass Castle. I didn't read it, but what a terrible decision to release this now. The Nut Job 2, No Name by Nature, I don't know what that is. Open Road Films. I hear Open Road Films is done. There was actually a really good article about what film studio is shutting down. Bleecker Street. One of the small indies is shutting down. I can't remember what it was. I have to look it up right now because I don't want to leave you guys in suspense. But basically, there's like a weird collapse going on in the indie film world. Or a couple of these small companies are starting to go out of business. I can't find it right now. Of course I can't. But Open Road, which was a joint venture with Regal and AMC, I want to say on the top of my head, I hear that's either getting shut down or we're getting bought out, which makes sense because all they did was release duds, right? They were supposed to make VOD films, I think, and they started to put them in theaters and they're awful. I mean, they're just trash. Just the one's going nowhere. Anything else coming this weekend? Ingrid Goes West. I'm kind of really excited for. More on the artistic criticism side of my sort of views of film, but Audrey Plaza looks amazing, and also Elizabeth Olsen, who I just talked about. Really interesting role for her. It seems it's a Sundance kind of film that got a lot of buzz from there. I don't know what it's gonna do. It's a rated R comedy, but it's super, super dark. So dark that it's really intriguing. So we'll see how it does, but it's obviously going to do no business, but I think maybe like Oscar wise, we'll see what happens. And then, maybe the last hurrah of summer is going to be August the 18th, my birthday. Hitman's Bodyguard has a chance of breaking out. Ryan Reynolds and Samuel L. Jackson. Maybe that's it. Maybe that's going to be the last hurrah. Although I could also see it just sort of not connecting with people. And then Lucky Logan is coming out. I was wrong. Bleecker Street is not going out of business. I'm so full of shit. It's another one that is going out. Like Relativity went out of business. That was a huge one. But it's these sort of upstarts trying to compete with the major studios. It's really, really hard to do. But Bleecker Street is not going out of business. They're releasing Lucky Logan. And a very special deal with Steven Soderbergh. Read the New York Times article about this. It's really fascinating. And that's really it. And there's nothing really coming out August 25th. A couple of movies I've never heard of. And then, the big one is September 8th, It. And then September 15th, you have Mother come out, the Darren Aronofsky horror film with Jennifer Lawrence. And Jude Law, I think, is also on that. Man, I could talk about movies endlessly, but I'm not going to. I'm going to cut it off here. Thanks for listening, guys. This has been the Wildland Podcast. I will be back next week.